Catherine Harris was a mother of 5 children. She had a master's degree in writing from one of the most prestigious universities in the country. She was intelligent, beautiful, and she had everything a person could want. A stunning home in Riverside, Connecticut. A family that loved her. Children who depended on her. Friends who admired her. A successful career as a writer and consultant. On the surface, Catherine had built the kind of life that most people spend their entire existence trying to achieve. But underneath all of that success, underneath all of that beauty and accomplishment, there was a marriage that was falling apart. There was a husband who was hiding things from her. There was a world of money and real estate and business dealings that Catherine was about to uncover. And on May 24, 2019, Catherine Harris dropped her 5 children off at school in the morning, drove back to her home, and she simply vanished. No note, no goodbye, no explanation, just gone. The police found her home in disarray. They found evidence of a struggle. They found blood. What happened to Catherine Harris that morning would become one of the most shocking and devastating disappearances in recent American history. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. For the next hour, we're going to walk you through every detail of Catherine's disappearance. We're going to examine the evidence that police collected. We're going to look at the suspects who were involved. We're going to understand the relationships that led to this tragedy. And we're going to try to answer the questions that have haunted investigators and Catherine's family for years. The first question is simple but devastating. Who took Catherine Harris? Was it someone she knew? Was it someone she trusted? The second question is equally troubling. Where is Catherine's body? Despite extensive searches and investigations that lasted years, Catherine has never been found. She's been missing for 5 years now, and her family still doesn't know where she is. The third question is the one that will haunt you long after you finish watching this video. How many people knew what happened to Catherine, and how many of them chose to stay silent? Because what we're about to reveal is that Catherine's disappearance wasn't a random act. It wasn't committed by a stranger. It was carried out by people who were close to her, people she trusted, people who knew her vulnerabilities and her weaknesses, and they used that knowledge against her in the most terrible way imaginable. Catherine Harris was born in New York City in 1968 to a prominent banking family. Her father was a successful financier and philanthropist. Her mother came from wealth as well. Catherine grew up surrounded by privilege and opportunity. She attended elite schools. She traveled the world. She had every advantage that money could provide. But Catherine wasn't just a rich girl coasting through life. She was driven. She was ambitious. She earned a bachelor's degree from Yale University in 1990, and then she pursued a master's degree in writing from New York University's prestigious Tisch School of the Arts. She wanted to be a writer. She wanted to create something meaningful with her life. At Yale, Catherine met a man named Richard Mitchell. Richard was charming and ambitious. He had recently moved to the United States from abroad. He was a gifted athlete, and he had an entrepreneurial spirit. Richard and Catherine fell in love. After graduation, they built a life together. Richard founded a luxury real estate development company called Sterling Properties Group. It became enormously successful. Richard was brilliant at building high-end homes and commercial properties. He had a talent for identifying valuable real estate opportunities and turning them into something extraordinary. By the time Catherine and Richard had been married for over a decade, they seemed to have it all. They had 5 beautiful children together, 2 boys and 3 girls. They had homes in Connecticut and elsewhere. They had money, status, and respect in their community. Catherine gave up her writing career to focus on raising their children. She became involved in philanthropy and charity work. She was known in her community as a devoted mother and a gracious wife. But the reality behind closed doors was very different from what people saw on the surface. By 2019, Richard Mitchell's marriage to Catherine had deteriorated significantly. According to friends and family members, Richard had become increasingly controlling and aggressive. He was obsessed with winning at everything. He was ruthless in his business dealings. He was willing to do whatever it took to get what he wanted. Catherine discovered something that would change everything. While reviewing financial documents related to their family business and properties, Catherine realized that Richard had borrowed approximately $2.5 million from her family under false pretenses. He had told Catherine's family that he needed the money for legitimate real estate development projects. The money was provided in good faith because Catherine's family trusted Richard, but the money was not used for what he said it would be used for. The money had gone elsewhere. Catherine confronted Richard about this. She demanded answers. She told him that she was considering filing for divorce. She consulted with attorneys. She began documenting everything. Catherine discovered something else during this period. She discovered that Richard had been having an affair with a woman named Victoria Spencer. Victoria was younger than Richard, and she worked in his real estate business. Richard and Victoria had been together for about a year, and Richard had kept this relationship hidden from Catherine. When Catherine found out about the affair, she was devastated but not entirely surprised. She had suspected for months that something was wrong. Friends of Catherine said that in the weeks before her disappearance, Catherine had become increasingly concerned about her safety. She told people that Richard was dangerous when he felt threatened. She told people that Richard had spoken to her about revenge fantasies. She told people that he had talked about wanting to hurt people who had betrayed him. Catherine was frightened of her own husband. On May 23, 2019, the day before she disappeared, Catherine met with a federal prosecutor. She had evidence of the financial crimes. She had documentation of the missing money. She was prepared to cooperate with an investigation into Richard's business practices. That evening, she told close friends that something had to change. She said that the situation had become unbearable. She said that she could not continue living this way. On the morning of May 24th, Catherine woke up early. Her 5 children were still asleep. She went through her normal morning routine. She prepared breakfast for her kids. She helped them get ready for school. She was described by her nanny as being quiet and withdrawn that morning. Catherine loaded her children into her car and drove them to school. Several children at the school later told investigators that they saw Catherine drop off her children around 8:15 in the morning. She waved goodbye to her kids. She kissed each of them. She seemed calm to the outside observer, but people who knew her well understood that she was deeply troubled. After dropping her children off at school, Catherine drove back to her home in Riverside. No one knows exactly what time she arrived home. No one knows exactly what happened when she got there. What we do know is that Catherine never showed up for a doctor's appointment in New York that she had scheduled for later that morning. The nanny, who was supposed to pick up the children from school that afternoon, became concerned when Catherine did not answer her phone. The nanny drove to the house and found that Catherine was not there. The nanny called police. Officers arrived at Catherine's home around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. When they entered the house, they immediately noticed something was terribly wrong. The garage floor showed evidence of what appeared to be blood. There were cleaning materials scattered around the garage. It was clear that someone had attempted to clean up a crime scene. Catherine's purse was in the house. Her wallet was in the house. Her jewelry was in the house. Everything that a person would take if they were leaving their home voluntarily was still there. Catherine Harris had vanished without a trace. Within hours, police began searching for her. They searched the neighborhood. They searched the woods surrounding her home. They searched every inch of her property. They found nothing. Catherine had disappeared, and the only clue that remained was the blood in the garage and evidence that someone had tried to clean it up. The investigation into Catherine Harris's disappearance moved with startling speed. Within 24 hours, detectives identified Richard Mitchell as the primary suspect. The evidence seemed to point directly at him. First, there was the blood in the garage. Forensic analysis would later confirm that the blood matched Catherine's DNA. Second, there were the cleaning materials. It was clear that someone had attempted to erase evidence of a crime. Third, Richard Mitchell did not have a credible alibi for the time when Catherine disappeared. He claimed that he had been at his apartment, alone, but there was no one to verify this claim. Fourth, and most damning, police obtained surveillance footage from cameras throughout the city of Hartford. This footage showed Richard Mitchell and Victoria Spencer traveling through Hartford that evening after Catherine vanished. The surveillance footage showed them stopping at multiple trash bins. The footage showed them placing bags into these trash cans. Police obtained warrants to search these trash cans. What they found was shocking and gruesome. They found items of clothing that belonged to Catherine. They found items that were stained with Catherine's blood. They found items that had been deliberately placed in trash receptacles throughout the city in an apparent effort to dispose of evidence. DNA analysis would later confirm that some of these items contained genetic material from Richard Mitchell, Catherine, and Victoria Spencer. It was a coordinated effort to dispose of evidence. It was a cover-up. The message was clear. Richard Mitchell and Victoria Spencer were involved in whatever had happened to Catherine. On June 1, 2019, exactly 1 week after Catherine disappeared, police arrested both Richard Mitchell and Victoria Spencer. They were charged with evidence tampering and hindering prosecution. Richard was held on a $500,000 bond. Victoria was eventually released on bail. The community was shocked. The media descended on the case with full force. News helicopters circled over Catherine's home. Reporters camped outside the police station. Every news outlet in the country began covering the story of Catherine Harris, the missing mother of 5. As the investigation unfolded, volunteers from throughout Connecticut and beyond began organizing search efforts. Hundreds of people came forward to help find Catherine. Search parties combed through forests and fields. Dogs trained to locate human remains were brought in to search properties owned by Richard Mitchell. Divers went into lakes and ponds near Catherine's home looking for her body. The search went on for weeks, then months, then years. Despite the massive effort, Catherine was never found. Her body has never been recovered. To this day, no one knows where Catherine Harris is. The lack of a body made the case more difficult in some ways and more intriguing in others. It meant that prosecutors would have to build a case without the most critical piece of physical evidence. It meant that Catherine's family would never have the closure of knowing where their daughter, sister, and mother had gone. It meant that the mystery of Catherine's fate would remain unsolved in some fundamental way. The investigation continued. Detectives examined Richard Mitchell's financial records. They discovered that Richard had significant gambling debts. He owed money to individuals who were connected to organized crime. He was desperate. He was under tremendous financial pressure. He was facing the dissolution of his marriage and the loss of access to his children. He had cheated Catherine out of millions of dollars. He had been unfaithful to her. He had lost control of the situation. From a motive perspective, investigators believed they had an airtight case. Richard wanted Catherine gone. He wanted to eliminate the threat that she posed to him. He wanted to prevent her from cooperating with federal prosecutors regarding his financial crimes. And so, according to investigators, he killed her, or had her killed. And then he and Victoria attempted to cover up the evidence. Just when it seemed that the case was moving toward a conviction, a shocking development occurred. Police executed search warrants on properties owned by Richard Mitchell's real estate company. One property in particular caught the attention of investigators. It was a house in Farmington that was under contract to be sold. The house was massive, over 10,000 square feet, listed for nearly $1.7 million. A neighbor of this property reported to police that he had heard loud metal banging sounds coming from the house on May 25th, the day after Catherine disappeared. This detail seemed significant. It raised questions. What was happening in that house? Why were there metal banging sounds? Was it related to Catherine's disappearance? Investigators obtained warrants to search the property thoroughly. They brought in forensic teams. They searched the entire house from top to bottom. They tore apart walls. They examined the foundation. They searched the property extensively, looking for any sign of Catherine or evidence related to her disappearance. But nothing was found. No body, no evidence, no indication that Catherine had ever been at that location. The leads that seemed so promising dried up. The investigation stalled. And then, prosecutors faced a critical decision. They had evidence of evidence tampering. They had DNA evidence linking Richard Mitchell and Victoria Spencer to items found in trash cans. But they did not have a body. They did not have a clear murder weapon. They did not have a witness who could testify to seeing Catherine being killed. Could they prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Richard Mitchell had murdered Catherine Harris? That was the question that haunted the prosecution team. In January 2020, Richard Mitchell was charged with capital murder, and kidnapping in connection with Catherine Harris's disappearance. It was the most serious charge possible. If convicted, Richard faced the possibility of a death sentence or life imprisonment without parole. The case became the focus of intense media attention and legal scrutiny. Attorneys were hired. Legal motions were filed. The case moved through the Connecticut court system slowly and deliberately. Both Richard Mitchell and Victoria Spencer maintained their innocence. They claimed that they had nothing to do with Catherine's disappearance. They said that they had been framed. They said that they were being persecuted. But the evidence against them was substantial and compelling. The surveillance footage showed them disposing of items in trash cans throughout Hartford. The DNA evidence connected them to items that belonged to Catherine. The motive was clear. Richard had a powerful reason to want Catherine gone. Then something unexpected happened. On January 30th, 2020, Richard Mitchell died by suicide. He killed himself while in custody awaiting trial. He left no note. He provided no explanation for his death or for what had happened to Catherine. His death stunned everyone involved in the case. Some people interpreted his suicide as an admission of guilt. Others suggested that the pressure of the legal proceedings and the media attention had driven him to despair. Regardless, Richard Mitchell would never stand trial. He would never face justice through the legal system. He would never be convicted or acquitted. His death left countless questions unanswered. It left Catherine's family without the closure of a trial and a conviction. It left investigators without the opportunity to question him further. Victoria Spencer, however, remained alive and continued to maintain her innocence. After Richard Mitchell's death, prosecutors shifted their focus to Victoria Spencer. If Richard had killed Catherine, what was Victoria's role? Had she participated in the killing? Had she helped cover it up? Had she known what Richard was planning? Victoria's attorneys argued that she had nothing to do with Catherine's disappearance. They argued that she had been manipulated by Richard. They argued that Richard had used her to help dispose of evidence, without fully explaining to her what that evidence was, or why it needed to be disposed of. The prosecution disagreed. They believed that Victoria was complicit in Catherine's death. They believed that she had participated knowingly in the effort to cover up the crime. The case against Victoria proceeded to trial. Prosecutors presented evidence of the surveillance footage. They presented DNA evidence. They presented evidence of the financial motive. They presented evidence of Richard's affair with Victoria and his control over her. Witness after witness testified about the dynamics of the relationship between Richard and Victoria. Friends of Victoria testified that Richard had been manipulative and controlling. They testified that Richard had isolated Victoria from her family. They testified that Richard had financial control over Victoria and used that control to keep her dependent on him. The trial lasted for weeks. The prosecution presented a compelling case. Victoria Spencer's defense team argued that she was a victim of Richard Mitchell's manipulation. They argued that she should not be held criminally responsible for actions that Richard had orchestrated. On a late afternoon in 2022, the jury returned with a verdict. Victoria Spencer was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. She was also convicted of tampering with evidence. The judge sentenced her to 14.5 years in prison, with 5 years of probation to follow after her release. Victoria would spend more than a decade behind bars for her role in what happened to Catherine Harris. But despite the convictions, despite the guilty verdicts, despite the prison sentences, one fundamental question remained unanswered. What actually happened to Catherine Harris that morning? Where did they take her? Where is her body? The case remained unsolved in this critical way. The investigation into Catherine Harris's disappearance took another shocking turn when prosecutors discovered that a lawyer named Michael Thompson had been involved in the case. Michael Thompson was a civil litigation attorney with connections to Richard Mitchell. According to the investigation, Michael Thompson had been aware that Catherine was missing. He was aware that she had been reported to police as a missing person. He was aware that an investigation was underway. And yet, according to prosecutors, Michael Thompson had advised Richard Mitchell and had possibly participated in efforts to cover up what had happened to Catherine. Michael Thompson was arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder. The charge alleged that Michael had conspired with Richard Mitchell to cause bodily harm to Catherine Harris. The charge also alleged that Michael had participated in the cover-up. Michael Thompson maintained his absolute innocence. He denied ever discussing Catherine's disappearance with Richard Mitchell. He denied ever advising Richard on how to cover up a crime. He hired one of the best legal defense teams money could buy. The case against Michael Thompson was more circumstantial than the case against Richard and Victoria. There were no surveillance footage of Michael disposing of evidence. There was no DNA evidence directly linking him to items found in trash cans. The prosecution's case against Michael rested largely on the assertion that he had discussed the case with Richard Mitchell in a privileged attorney-client conversation. Michael's attorneys argued that even if such conversations had occurred, they would be protected by attorney-client privilege and therefore inadmissible in court. The case became complicated by legal arguments about privilege, about what constitutes conspiracy, about how far responsibility extends in a criminal case. Michael Thompson was released on bail pending trial. He was required to wear a GPS monitoring device. He surrendered his passport. He agreed not to leave the state of Connecticut except to visit his elderly father in Florida. The case remained unresolved as Michael awaited trial, and Catherine Harris remained missing, her fate still unknown after more than 3 years. Throughout all of this legal turmoil and investigation, Catherine Harris's family has been suffering in ways that are almost impossible to describe. Her mother, Patricia Harris, gave an interview to a true crime podcast in which she spoke about the unbearable pain of not knowing what happened to her daughter. Patricia said that she wakes up every morning thinking about Catherine. She thinks about where Catherine might be. She thinks about what her daughter's final moments must have been like. She thinks about the fact that Catherine will never see her children again. She will never watch them graduate from high school. She will never attend their weddings. She will never meet her grandchildren. All of those moments, all of those precious moments in a mother's life, have been stolen from Catherine. Catherine's 5 children have been forced to live with the knowledge that their mother did not abandon them by choice. They know that something terrible happened to her. They know that people they trusted, people they thought they knew, were involved. They have been forced to grow up without their mother. They have been forced to carry the trauma of her disappearance throughout their childhoods and into adulthood. The oldest children were old enough to remember their mother clearly. The younger children have had to rely on photographs and videos and the stories told by other people to understand who their mother was. The psychological impact on these children has been profound and lasting. Therapists and psychologists who have worked with children in similar situations describe the damage as immense. These children have lost a parent to violence, not to natural causes, but to deliberate, calculated violence perpetrated by people in their own family and their own family's social circle. They have had to see their father arrested and imprisoned. They have had to see details of his infidelity and his crimes broadcast across national media. They have had to answer questions from classmates and friends about their mother's disappearance. They have had to live with uncertainty, with unanswered questions, with the unbearable knowledge that no one knows where their mother is. Catherine's case became a symbol of something larger. It became a symbol of the dangers that exist even in families that appear to have everything. It became a symbol of how violence can lurk beneath the surface of privilege and success. It became a symbol of how people can hide their true nature, their true intentions, their true capacity for cruelty, behind a veneer of respectability. 5 years after Catherine Harris disappeared, fundamental questions about her case remain unanswered. The first and most important question is, where is Catherine Harris? Her body has never been found, despite years of searching. Investigators have searched properties owned by Richard Mitchell. They have searched forests and fields and waterways surrounding Catherine's home. They have followed up on tips and leads from thousands of people who came forward with information. None of these efforts have resulted in finding Catherine's remains. Without a body, the case is incomplete. The family does not have the closure of a proper burial. The community does not have the peace of knowing that Catherine's remains have been treated with dignity. The second major question is, what exactly happened in Catherine's home that morning? Did Richard Mitchell personally kill Catherine, or did he have someone else do it? Did Victoria Spencer participate actively in the killing, or did she participate only in the cover-up? How did they transport Catherine's body out of the house? Where did they take her? Why have they refused to cooperate with investigators to reveal where Catherine is? The third question is, were there other people involved in Catherine's disappearance who have never been identified or charged? The coordination required to commit this crime, to dispose of evidence across an entire city, to maintain a consistent story, suggests that more than just Richard and Victoria may have been involved. Who else knew? Who else helped? The fourth question is a more philosophical one. How does a family recover from this kind of tragedy? How do Catherine's children learn to live with what has happened to their mother? How do they process the betrayal of their father? How do they move forward when fundamental questions about their mother's fate remain unanswered? These are the questions that investigators still grapple with. These are the questions that Catherine's family thinks about every single day. Catherine Harris was a real person. She was a mother. She was a daughter. She was a sister. She was a friend. She was a woman who had dreams and ambitions, and a life that was full of meaning. She was a woman who tried to do the right thing when she discovered that her husband had stolen money from her family. She was a woman who had the courage to consult with federal prosecutors about her husband's crimes. She was a woman who wanted to protect her children and to ensure that they would have a safe and stable future. And for that, she was killed. She was taken from her children. She was separated from her family. Her fate has become an unsolved mystery that will likely haunt investigators and her loved ones for the rest of their lives. Catherine's story is a reminder that dangers lurk in places we don't expect to find them. It's a reminder that people can hide their true nature behind a facade of respectability and success. It's a reminder that financial crime and personal betrayal can lead to devastating consequences. It's a reminder that justice, even when it is served, does not bring closure or healing. Victoria Spencer is in prison, but Richard Mitchell is dead and cannot face the consequences of his actions. Michael Thompson's case remains unresolved, and Catherine remains missing. As we close this story, we want to ask you something that I hope will spark discussion in the comments below. What do you think happened to Catherine Harris that morning? Where do you think her body might be? And what should be the appropriate punishment for people who commit crimes and then refuse to reveal where they have hidden the bodies of their victims? We want to hear your thoughts. We want to hear your theories. We want to hear your perspective on this case. And we want to tell you that if you found this story compelling, if you found it moving, if it made you think differently about the people in your lives, then please subscribe to our channel. We are committed to telling the stories of missing and murdered people. We are committed to keeping these cases alive in the public consciousness. We are committed to pursuing justice for victims and for their families. Subscribe now and you'll never miss any of our upcoming videos about unsolved mysteries and unsolved crimes. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring about Catherine Harris. Thank you for remembering her name.